God's grace and peace be with you. This Sunday is unusual in the liturgical calendar because we actually celebrate two different things on one day. Palm Sunday, where we celebrate and note Jesus' triumphant and celebratory entrance into Jerusalem, just whipsaws so quickly into Passion Sunday, where we are stunned by the reality of his arrest and crucifixion and death. This is a whiplash kind of day, moving again from high hopes and expectation and rejoicing and dancing and singing and shouting to stunned shock and silence. This year we can particularly relate to this. We're experiencing the same thing ourselves across the world. In the United States, in particular, we have whiplashed from a period of incredible economic expansion and prosperity for most of the country, for incredibly low jobless rates, and just a sense that things have been going so well. And now, all of a sudden, everything is different. We are faced with massive economic strain in our country. Millions of people have experienced job loss. Millions more will. Entire businesses are going bankrupt, shutting down. We have no idea what the next few weeks are going to hold. All we know is that we're being told it's going to get worse before it gets better. Loved ones are dying, and we cannot always predict who is going to be affected by this illness. We can't predict whether it's going to be those who are weak or those who are healthy. We can't predict who's going to get sick. We don't even know who is sick yet. We have moved from a time of celebrating a strong economy and things going well to a period of stunned, shocked silence in the face of this reality over which we have no power. This gospel reading, as we follow at a distance behind Jesus and watch as he is arrested and condemned, we can perhaps understand and feel a little bit more what it was like for the disciples, who were probably still elated over the triumphant entry and the singing and the shouting that accompanied him, and were so delighted that they were honored and privileged to be part of it, and had no idea what they were going to be experiencing such a short time later. Even though Jesus tried to warn them, they didn't see this coming. They did not see it coming. And you can imagine what they must have been thinking and feeling, if they could even think clearly about anything or even understand their own feelings, as they watched the events that we read about in this gospel. It is a difficult thing to identify with until we face times like this. But the point of this gospel lesson, again, as we've heard every year, but maybe this year we're paying attention more than we have in a while. The point of this gospel lesson is not that, the hope and the joy and the promise that we celebrate in Jesus. The promise is not that it's going to protect us from every bad thing that could happen. The promise is not that we are always going to be celebrating. Jesus never promised us that. He never claimed it for himself. But here is the promise. As we whiplash and whipsaw from highs to lows and uncertainty facing us that we don't know when we'll see the end of, here's the promise. That God is on this path, the whole path, all of it. I don't know if Jesus knew everything that was going to happen to him. Biblical scholars kind of disagree on that point. Did Jesus have full certainty of what was going to be happening to him? He may have, and yet he prayed and asked God to spare him from this, if it was possible. But what he did do consistently was put himself in God's hands. And then he stepped out on the road that was ahead of him. I don't know if he knew exactly what was going to happen. Maybe he understood it intellectually, but the reality of experiencing humiliation and torture and death is a very different thing. We don't know whether Jesus was prepared as we think he might be prepared. We know that he experience this with anguish, with grief, with suffering and pain. We know that God died, as we do. And that promise on this path is not so much that we will be spared from suffering and death ourselves, but the promise is that God will be with us on that whole path. And that this gift of love from this God who steps out on that path, I don't know if it's more courage, but certainly profound love, who steps out on that path full of love that certainly looks like courage. We know that that God does that for us. Our God does that so that we will know when we are facing the same struggles and hurts and griefs and losses and death. We will know that the God of life has not left us, has not abandoned us or forgotten us. This journey is common to every living thing on this planet. We know times of joy and we know times of loss and uncertainty. And every one of us knows that ultimately we will know death. But what we also know as followers of Jesus is that we also know God. And we know a God who knows death. And we know a God who knows death because of God's incredible love for us. We don't know what the weeks ahead are going to hold. We don't know what the days ahead are going to hold. But the truth is, beloved, we have never known what the days and weeks ahead were going to hold. We know what we've been promised by the structures and the powers of this world, and sometimes we experience what we've been told we can expect. But we also know that everything can change in the blink of an eye. All we have ever known is that we have the moment that God has given us and that God is present in it. We know that we have a future that God has given us, but we don't know what that future looks like. But we know that God is present in us, in it. God is present in that future, and if God is present in that future, then we need not fear it, whether it holds life or death. And I know that's easy to say. I know it is easy to say, but it is important to remember even when it feels hard to believe. We can step out into these next few weeks with a love that looks like courage, even if we're not feeling particularly brave. We can step out for one another, following Jesus on this path with a love that looks like courage. And the more we place ourselves in that love of Christ who has walked this journey to the cross for us, the more we place ourselves in that love, the more courage we will find. I know that uncertainty is a heavy load to bear. I know that it's hitting some of us more than others. I know that the hardships of this sheltering in place are hitting some of us harder than others. I know that it is hard not to be able to gather for worship because we do find such strength and courage in the community. And it is hard not to come together for worship, not to be able to come together to worship Christ and journey with him as he makes this holy week. But we have the assurance that he is there. And in the gospel reading today, we are reminded that there were others who could not travel with Jesus either. There are a couple of verses that I added onto the reading today to remind us of the women who had to remain at a distance, who looked on after having traveled with Jesus this whole way, and yet they couldn't be with him at the end. They couldn't be with him even had they wanted to, and yet they still had a part to play. They still had a part to play to testify to the promise that is to come. They still had a part to play knowing his presence with them in all things. They still had a part to play even when they couldn't be with him. We have a part to play too. And it's not so much a matter of us being with Jesus in this Holy Week as we look forward to the marking of Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday, but it's more a matter of remembering that he's with us. And even when we can't physically gather for worship, he has drawn us into his body, and nothing can sever those ties. We are together in him, and he is here for us. He's here for us in this moment, and in the next, and in the next, and in the next. and he will be forever. He'll be here for us so that we will live in him. Thanks be to God.